So as usual, I've got some notes up on my blog at dave.if90.net. Okay, this time KIB216 tutorials week 3. So I've got the lecture notes up from yesterday and the screencast, so they should all be up to date as of yesterday. Now those notes, and I'll be referring to some of the slides as we go through the tutorial today as well, and I've pulled out the relevant parts and posted them further down. So we'll be looking at two things today. First of all, installing WordPress on a remote web server, and then once we've done that, we'll look at starting to create a WordPress theme from scratch. So we'll start with installing WordPress. I do have notes further down on installing WordPress on the Qt web server, but I'm not going to demonstrate that. I'm just going to demonstrate on a remote web server. Now, as I've kind of mentioned previously, your web hosting may be subtly different to mine. So if there's slightly different ways of doing this with your web hosting, don't worry too much. They're all going to be fundamentally the same. You may have different interfaces for doing it. I'm not necessarily going to have time to be able to stop and help people out individually as we go along. But if you have questions at the end, or if we don't have time, then via email I'll be happy to help you with attempting to configure that there. But I'm just going to demonstrate installing it on a blank website that I've set up, and hopefully the process will be very similar for everyone else. Okay, so as I said, I've pulled out the relevant parts of the lecture slides and reposted them here by themselves on installing WordPress. There's a link to WordPress's own documentation here, which covers it in quite some detail. So that's another resource for you to use if you want to look through that. But essentially, as I said, there's 4 steps. We download WordPress and upload the WordPress core files to our website. We create the database. We edit some configuration settings in WordPress so that it knows how to point to our database, and then we create an administrator account so that we can start using the WordPress installation. So the first part, obviously, we need to obtain the WordPress files, and there's a link here to the download page. So just to avoid a little bit of confusion that sometimes crops up, there's a wordpress.org website and a wordpress.com website. WordPress.com is not what we're interested in today. WordPress.com came later, and it's their own hosted service for blogging, okay, like a Tumblr or a Blogger or something like that. To actually do anything with the WordPress software and WordPress development, we're interested in wordpress.org. Okay, so that's where you go to actually download the WordPress package. Okay, there's obvious download links to it. You can download it. It doesn't really matter which archive format you download it in, but you download the file, which I've already done. You'll extract it. Okay, and it will extract to a WordPress folder, and inside of that folder there's a bunch of other files and folders. Okay, mostly PHP files, and these are all of the files which make up the core functionality of WordPress. Okay, so everything from the interfaces that it offers us to the code which interacts with the database, all of that sort of thing. So this is what we install, and then we build our theme on top of that, or inside of that installation. Okay, so now I need somewhere to install this, and I have set up a blank new fresh website at a subdomain on my website. So obviously this will be whatever your website is. The point is, when you set it up initially, if you go to your URL, then there's essentially going to be nothing there. You might get some sort of server message or some sort of placeholder page that tells you that you're ready to upload files. But so essentially, as of now, I've got nothing there. Okay, so I need to transfer these files, so I'm going to need to use a FTP client in order to do that. So I'll do this by using FileZilla initially. So I'm going to connect to my remote site using FTP, using the details that have been set up. Now these details you should receive when you set up your hosting, and if not, you should be able to contact them and ask them to either set that up for you, or I'll show you in a second how you can set them up yourself. So as I've logged into my remote site, you can see there's actually already a bunch of folders here. Okay, so this contains various software that's required for my web server to actually operate. So you can see there's actually the PHP language, is installed here. Okay, and various other things. Now, one of these folders is going to be what's called your web root folder, which is the folder that your URL will point to. Okay, and so again, you should get this information in a setup email, for example. But more often than not, it's going to be called public_HTML. You can see I've also got this www folder here. That's simply just a shortcut to this public HTML folder. So this is where you will do essentially all of your modification of your website files within this folder. It would be rare that you would ever have to mess with any of this other stuff outside it. Okay, so I'll go inside of here. I can see it's an empty folder, and what I'm going to do is upload the contents of the WordPress folder that I downloaded. Now I guess there's sort of two ways you can do this. You could upload the WordPress folder itself. I recommend against doing that because if you upload that in a subfolder, then in order for people to access your site, they will have to add the name of that subfolder to the end of the URL, like this. Okay, and it's just an unnecessary extra step that you don't want people to have to do. Now, if you've already done that for whatever reason, you can change it. It's not a huge deal, but it's easiest if you just don't do it in the first place. So what I do recommend is getting the contents of that WordPress folder, okay, and grabbing all of those, and it's this that I want to upload directly to my public HTML folder on my remote web host. Okay, so they're all uploading, and while that's happening, we'll jump on over and look at something else. So that's the first part of I'm uploading the WordPress files. The second part, okay, referring back to my notes, okay, is we need to create a database for WordPress to access. So in my case, the way that I'm going to do this is to use a web-based control panel interface that's installed on my web hosting, on my web server. Okay, and again, this is something that you should receive in the details of a setup email. In my case, it's located at my URL and then /cpanel. Okay, so the name of the control panel software that I have is cPanel. It's a very common one. You may have something different, and that's fine. It'll just be the interface is different, but it should be able to do all of the same things that I'm going to demonstrate. Okay, so this is a link to my cPanel page. I should log out just to show you that. Okay, that is something that requires a login. Okay, so cPanel. Oops. Okay, so in the very first instance, I won't obviously have already been logged in, so this is something that you will require a login to, because you don't want anyone just to be able to access this and then go and mess around with your site. So again, you'll get a login information for this in your setup information. And in my case, okay, I've got a username and a password that I've entered in here. I log in. Okay, and this is what the cPanel interface looks like. So this allows me to configure a whole bunch of settings in relation to my web hosting. Now I should mention here that sometimes with some web hosting, you actually have an option. They recognize that certain software is very common, and so you often get a menu options to have sort of like a one-click install process for something like WordPress. Now if you've got something like that, then I'm totally happy for you to use that. Basically that process will replace this entire installation process. It will install the WordPress files on your server, set up the database for you, and create the accounts. So if your hosting has that and you want to use that, then by all means go ahead and do that. That's fine. But I think it's still worthwhile looking at the process, because you're bound to eventually come across a situation where you will have to manually install it at some point. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of options here. The first thing to probably take note of is that they actually in general have really good help files just built within this anyway. And anything you can't find here, you should be able to email your hosting provider and they will give you help with. Okay, but they've got like wizards to help you set up common things. You've got a series of video tutorials here on how to do various different things. So there's one, for example, on how to set up a MySQL database, which will take you through essentially exactly what I'm going to show you. Okay, and then there's a whole heap of other options. A lot of these you will probably never touch. Okay, but you have things like there's PHP configuration here. So as I mentioned last week in the differences between attempting to get your site running on the QUT server and your own server, okay, on the QUT server having access to the PHP configuration is something that you won't have. You won't be able to change anything here. Not that you necessarily you may and probably won't need to, but it's good to have that option there if you are using something which requires certain configurations in PHP to be changed. You have things to do with your domain names. So anything to do with setting up your domain names should be accessed through these interfaces here. But the part that okay, sorry, we've also got FTP accounts here. So if you don't, for whatever reason, already have a default FTP account set up, you can always come in here and create one. Okay, and you simply create again another username and password and create that account. Okay, so you can see that I've got an existing one down here, which is the one that I already used to log in using my FTP client. Okay, but if you ever need to change this or come back and add more or delete them, then that's the interface you can do that through. There's also you usually get something like a file manager, okay, which actually allows you to browse the files and folders on your website. So this is one way of putting files on the website, and some people like to use this because it means they don't have to install another program, but I never use it just because I think if you use it long enough, you'll find that it's a lot slower than using a standalone FTP client or one that's integrated into your code editor. So I won't talk any more about that. And then you've got a whole heap of sort of analytics interfaces, so you can look at web traffic, see how many hits your page is getting, where it's where they're coming from, and all this sort of thing. How much data is being transferred in and out of your site, so you can tell if you're pushing the upper limits of your hosting plan and all that sort of thing. Okay, but for today's purposes, really the only part I'm interested in is the databases down here. So I have a bunch of options here, and the first three of them essentially are different interfaces for doing the same thing. So we've got phpMyAdmin, which I already talked about, okay, which is sort of a low-level interface for interacting with your databases. But then we've also got some high-level ones that are a bit simpler to use just for the purposes of creating databases and creating users. Okay, so these first two are essentially the same. The first one's just a wizard, like a step-by-step thing, and sorry, the second one is a wizard, and then the first one is essentially just all those interfaces in one page. So I'm going to look at this. I've actually got an existing database just from the previous class, which I will delete, so I can start again from afresh. And all right, need to get rid of that. There we go, we need to do that. Delete. Okay, and I'm also going to delete the database user that I created. Okay, so this is what it will look like when you initially come to it and there's no databases set up. Okay, this is where it will list the databases that you have. Depending on your hosting package, it may determine how many databases they'll allow you to have, but it's usually multiple databases. So here it's telling me that I don't have any associated with my account. So because WordPress stores its content in a database, and that's obviously something I'm going to need to create. So the first step is to create the database itself, and you'll notice here that conventionally it usually prepends all these names with the username, my control panel login username, I suppose just as a way of identifying which user has done what. Okay, but I can call it, you can call it basically whatever you want. So you might be inclined to call this database, for example, WordPress, which will work, but I'd suggest you call it something specific to the nature of the site, just because there may come a time where you want to install multiple sites, multiple WordPress installations, and if you call each one WordPress, WordPress 1, WordPress 2, it might be a bit more difficult to figure out which is which. So if, for example, this website is your portfolio, then I would suggest calling it portfolio, for example. If it's a blog, then maybe you call it blog. Okay, but we give it a name. This is the important point. We create the database. That's the first step. We'll go back. Okay, so now I can see this database is listed. Now the second part of this equation is we actually have to assign a user to the database. So you see here under users it's got nothing listed because I haven't created and assigned one yet. But the reason that we need this is, again, because in some way this database is accessible on the internet, so we want to give it some sort of security login credentials so that not just anyone can go and mess around with our database. So to do that, we create a username for a database user. Okay, and in this case I'm going to call it WordPress. Okay, and I could use this username for any WordPress installation that I had then, because each WordPress installation is going to require the same access privileges. It's actually stopping me from doing that because it says the username cannot be longer than 8 characters, so I'm just going to abbreviate this to WP. Okay, so my username then will be KIB216L_WP. Then I need to create a password. Lots of these have password generators where you can generate a very secure password, or you can just enter in your own password. Okay, so just a word on this password here. It's a good idea not to use the same passwords for everything, even though I know that's convenient. Your SQL, your database user password is actually going to be something that you have to put into a configuration file which anyone who has access to your web server will be able to open and see. So it is a password that not necessarily the public, but anyone else who has access to your web server, if you work in a team, is going to see. So I suggest you don't make it the same thing as your bank password, for example. Okay, so we create the user with the username and password. Go back. And the final part of this is we've created the database, we've created the user, but we need to assign that user to the database and tell it which privileges that it has in order to do things with the database. So the way that we do this is with this final part at the bottom here, the add user to database. So we select the user, I've only got one here, and we select the database, again I've only got one, and I click add, and so then it will add my KIB216L_WP user to the database that I created here. Okay, so I hit add, and then it comes up with a screen which asks me what privileges, or which privileges I want to allow that user to have in terms of interacting with the database. So again, you could have multiple users that you want to provide with different privileges. So maybe you would have a user which you only want to be able to read information for the database. Okay, they can go and see what's in there, but you don't want to give them ability to change anything or accidentally delete something. Okay, but in this case, for WordPress, so WordPress is going to be our user here. It's going to need to do all of these things. It's going to need to be able to create stuff, read stuff, delete stuff, modify stuff. So we're just going to tick and give it all of the privileges and then make those changes. Go back. Okay, and now, okay, I can see that the user that I created is now assigned the privileges that I just assigned to this database here. Okay, and if ever I need to come back and modify any of the information that I've just entered there, I can do that again through this interface. Okay, now so this is all information that we will need to remember for a little moment, because we need to enter it into WordPress, the WordPress's configuration, so that it knows how to connect to our database. Once we've done that, you can kind of put it out of your mind, but we do need to retain it for. We do need to remember it for that purpose. Okay. So I'll go back to the home section here, and I do just want to demonstrate that I'm going to click on phpMyAdmin, which will actually allow me to inspect this database that I've created. Okay, so there's my database over here that I've created. Alright, and the thing that I just want to indicate here is that it's an empty database at the moment. Okay, so the difference between what we did last week, where I actually had to go and manually enter things into the database, and this week is that I don't have to worry about this now. WordPress is going to take care of all of that for me. All WordPress needs to know is those login credentials for that database in order to be able to access it. Okay, so I'll just check over and make sure that WordPress has been uploaded to my web server, and it looks like it has. Okay, so I will go back and visit my URL, and we'll see what it looks like now. Okay, so as soon as you've uploaded the WordPress installation files to the web root of your web server, and you go and refresh the web page, the URL, then you'll see a page like this. It actually says WordPress error, but this is what it's meant to look like. Okay, it just means that we haven't completely finished setting everything up yet. So it's telling me that there doesn't seem to be a wp-config.php file, and it needs this before it gets started. So that's one of the files within the WordPress installation that contains a bunch of configuration information, and among that information is going to be that which we just set up in order to access the database. So there's a few ways we can go about creating this. We can create it manually. We can go and edit it through here. There's also the installation interfaces provide us with a way to do that as well. Quite often this doesn't entirely work properly due to not having enough access privileges to create files on your web server, but that's okay. We'll try this first anyway. So we'll hit create configuration file here. Okay, and it tells us it needs to know a few things about the database that we've set up for it. Okay, so the database name, username, password, the host, and a table prefix if we want to run more than one WordPress installation in a single database. Okay, and it says if for any reason the automatic file creation doesn't work, don't worry. It will give us the code to copy and paste into the file manually if we need to. Okay, so we'll go let's go, and then it comes up with this interface here which asks me for the information about my database. Okay, so this is the information that we just set up in this interface here. So first of all, there is the, where are we here? Let's drag that out. And there. Okay, so first of all is the database name, which we've set up. Okay, so that's this name here, KIB216L underscore portfolio, and I will put that in there. The username that we created, okay, the database user, which is this one here, KIB216L underscore WP, put that in there. The password that I set up for the database, okay, which was KIB216 my SQLDB. Okay, so this is the password. As I said, it's going to be viewable by some people. And then the database host. Okay, so the database host is essentially the URL or the IP address of the server where it has the database software running, the MySQL software running. Now, almost always that's going to be running on the same server as your web server. Okay, so in that case, all you enter in there is localhost. If it is running somewhere else, then that is information that again you should be sent in the setup email. But that would be pretty rare for that to occur unless you've got some really big scaled what do you call it, distributed setup. So I would be surprised if for anyone it's something other than localhost. But anyway, if you're unsure, my suggestion is try localhost first. If you get some error message about unable to establish a connection to the database and you've made sure that all this other information is correct, then I'd start looking for what your database host is. Okay, and the final part is the table prefix. So you can optionally use the one database to store information for multiple WordPress installations, in which case each installation needs to use a different name for the tables, and so you'd put in a different table prefix here. That's a pretty uncommon thing to do, and if you wanted to install multiple instances of WordPress, my suggestion would be to use a separate database for each one anyway, just so that you don't get all of the content mixed up together. But either way, if you just have one, then you can put whatever you want here, and my suggestion is just leave it as the default WP underscore. Okay, so we've put all that information in there. Just, make doubly sure it's all exactly correct to the letter, and then I'll hit submit. Okay, and as expected, it couldn't create the file automatically, okay, because my hosting, its default permissions won't allow WordPress to create the file there in that directory. So that's fine. In that case, it gives me a bunch of code which I can simply copy and paste into the configuration file. Okay, so if I just jump back to my WordPress installation for a moment in FileZilla, you can see that there's a file that comes included called wp-config.sample.php, and so this is essentially that config file without some of the information filled in. So what we can do, probably what the simplest process to do is to edit this file, and I'll do this through FileZilla. I'm going to go View Edit, go, yep. Okay, and it will open up in my code editor. And so this is what the sample file looks like, okay? Essentially all the configuration file is doing is saving a bunch of variables that it needs, okay? And in our case, it needs to know some information about the database. So we could do this a bunch of ways. I could have just come in here and manually filled in that exact same information here, okay, with my database name, user password, and host. But I can also just copy all of this code here and simply replace everything in this config file there. Okay, and it's essentially the same thing, except it's filled out in the appropriate places where my specific information needs to go. Okay, but whichever way you do it, the end result is you get this file with that information appropriately filled out, and then some other default settings that it also sets up. Okay, so I'll save this and then I'll go back. So a nice thing about FileZilla is that it will recognize when you've saved something and you need to re-upload it to the server. So I'll say yes. So this is a big thing that people often forget when they're moving from creating static websites to or creating local websites to creating remote websites, is that they'll download the file, edit it, save it, but forget to re-upload it to the server and then go back and refresh the page and wonder why the changes haven't been made. So you have to either get in the habit of doing that each time you make a save, or use something which makes sure it automatically uploads when you save it for you. And this way of viewing and editing the files through FileZilla is one way of doing that. And then I'll also, after this, do the same thing using the integrated FTP client in my code editor. Okay, but anyway, we need to upload that back to our server, but we also need to change the file name. Okay, so let's see, how do we do this here? There we go, rename. Okay, so the actual config file needs to just be called wp-config.php. That's what WordPress will look for, and if it's not named exactly that, it will not know that you've put it there. Okay, so that's very important that it's called exactly wp-config.php. So I've renamed that on the server. Now, now I should be able to come along here and go run the install. And as long as I've filled in the config information correctly, it will give me this next screen where I fill out some rudimentary information about my website. So first of all, I'll give it a title. I'll just call this Dave's Site. And then we also need to create one more user account. So there's a lot of user accounts here, but this is the one that you will use the most. We don't really need to worry about the other ones now that they're set up. But we do need to create a user account to actually log in to WordPress's administration interfaces. So we create a username. The default username is admin, but I usually like to change this to my name, because that username, if you're outputting the author of a post along with the post content in your template, then that's what will output along with that. So I find it more useful to have my name output than some anonymous admin output. But functionally it doesn't matter. And it may be a personal preference thing. But anyway, I like to create the initial login as my name. We give it a password. Okay, and you can also input your email address here. And the reason for this is that WordPress can email you to let you know when certain things happen within the blog. So let's just say you get a new user register, or someone posts a comment on one of your posts, then WordPress can email you to let you know that, so you can go and moderate that comment, or go and check and see who the new user is, for example. Okay, so, and the final setting here just asks whether you want to allow search engines to index this site or not. So I guess it's possible that you want to have a, for some reason you want to have a site that's not indexed by search engines. I can't see why anyone wouldn't want their portfolio website to be indexed by a search engine. So my suggestion is that you leave that checked. Okay, so this is the final part. As soon as I hit this button here, it's going to call a bunch of WordPress scripts that are going to go and set up the databases for me. So again, just to have another look over at phpMyAdmin, at this point the database is still empty. Okay, then I hit install WordPress. Okay, and it says success, it's been installed. If I come back here and refresh this now, okay, all of a sudden I've got a whole bunch of tables in my database. Okay, so this is the part that I don't have to worry about, is manually interacting with the database. All of that stuff WordPress takes care of for me, and that's a good bulk of what the WordPress core files are all about. So you probably won't ever really have to come in here and look at any of this stuff, but I think it's worthwhile just having a quick look at what some of the tables are that it creates. Okay, so for example, there's one called wp_users. If we look at that, okay, we can look at the content, and I can see there is the user that I just created there, Dave. Okay, and my password has been what's called hashed, so it's obscured so that people can't see it if they just have access to the database. And there's my email address, and yes, so all of the information about the user. And as more users are added to the site, WordPress will add more records to this table. Okay, we've got a table for various options. Okay, about the page. Sorry, let's try that again. Okay, so you can see in the database things like the URL of the site, the name of the site, the description, all sorts of other options. Okay, they're all stored in this table. And then there's obviously going to be somewhere for the content itself to be stored. Okay, so there's a table called WP posts, all right, which at the moment contains 2 default posts. Okay, and this one's probably similar or analogous to the very simple table that I set up as a database in last week's tutorial. As you can see, it has a similar thing where it has an ID to uniquely identify a post. Okay, it's got the title of the post and the content of the post, but then unlike my example last week, it's got a whole bunch of extra information like the date that the post was created or modified, and things like what have we got here, post status. Okay, so we can have posts that are published or unpublished in draft mode, so we can create the content but not make it publicly viewable, and the way that it does that is to have a different value in this column here of post status. Okay, so but really we don't need to concern ourselves too much with the database now, so I can pretty much close this down and not worry about that anymore. I can probably close this cPanel down as well. Now that I've set all that up, I don't need to worry about that anymore either. Everything that I now do with the site is going to happen either through the WordPress administration interfaces or through me transferring files to the web server via an FTP client. Okay, so the success screen telling me that the installation has been set up, and then it will give me a link to the login page. Okay, I won't log in through here yet, but what I'm going to do is go back and just see what my root URL looks like now. Okay, so this now is a default installation of WordPress setup with the very few things that I configured in the initial installation screens. Okay, as you can see, it's got some default content, and it's got a default theme applied. Okay, so this is, in my lecture I talked about the front end and the back end interfaces. This is the front end interface. This is the interface that the public will see when they come to view your site and your site's content. Okay, so the back end, or the administration interfaces of the website, is where we're going to spend, well, it's where you as the site administrator and content publisher are going to spend most of your time administering the site and publishing content. So in order to access that, you can always get there in a WordPress installation by simply going to your URL and then adding /wp-admin. Okay, and if I'm not already logged in, that's going to redirect me to a login page, okay, which you can see is a file called wp-login.php. Okay, and just to dispel any sort of sense of magic, you'll find that there is a file called wp-login.php in the WordPress core files. Okay, so the WordPress core files are all just PHP files that provide you with these interfaces. In this case, this one provides you with a login interface. And then the theme that we create is essentially just building on top of that. Okay, so I need to log in with the username and password that I created in the setup screens for WordPress. Okay, and I can tell it to remember me if I want. Click login. Okay, and then that will take me, you can see here, to my WP admin section. Okay, so this is the admin, or the back-end section, or the administration interfaces of your WordPress site. And if you've used WordPress before, then I'm sure this looks familiar. So the type of things that you can do here, they're kind of split into two parts over here on the menus. You've kind of got your content stuff here, and then your settings stuff down the bottom. So these first four is where you will create content. So like adding posts or moderating posts, we can see there's the default one there. I can go in and modify that, update it, assign it categories, publish it, do whatever I want with it. The same deal for what have we got here? Pages. Okay, posts and pages. And then other things relating to content like categories and tags. So again, as I think I've already mentioned, when it comes to content types in WordPress, you've really only got two categories. Okay, you've got a post or a page, and the only difference between those two things is a post is intended. A post you can think of like a blog post. Okay, the idea of displaying posts is that you display a bunch of them on any given page. Okay, and in a blog, usually in reverse chronological order. Whereas a page will be a standalone page by itself, and when you navigate to that page, it's just the content of that page which you see. Other than that, that's the only two differences between the content types that you create in WordPress. And just with that, there's an amazing amount of flexibility in what kind of content you can create. Okay, we'll have a look. Maybe we'll look at these various different parts in different weeks as we get to actually doing things with them. But we'll look down here. You've got a section for settings. Okay, whereby if I look in here, I can see some of the information that I've already set up. Okay, including the title. There's a tagline or a description of the website, which is usually defaults to just another WordPress site. So you'll probably want to change that to something like, you know, the portfolio of Wallace, something like that. Okay, this is, you can also modify the URL. Okay, so if for some reason you decide to change your domain name at some point, if you were to just change that, it would actually sort of break your WordPress installation, because it would be expecting all of your resources to be at the domain name that you told it when you installed it. So if you do, for whatever reason, change your domain name, then you'll need to come in here and make sure you update that setting here. Okay, and you can see other stuff that I've already entered, like the email address and a whole myriad of other settings. There's a tools setting where you can actually import and export content. So if you already have, say, a WordPress site which has some content on it which you want to use, you can always export the content from that site and import it into your new site. Or if you decide later on that you want to export this content to something else, you can use those tools as well. You've got a section for administering users, so adding new users and maybe providing different privileges for them. So if you want to allow someone else to access your site but maybe only publish content and not actually mess around with any settings, you could do something like that there. You've got a section for plugins. Okay, and so again, there's some default plugins which don't necessarily do a lot that come with WordPress, but you can download and install new plugins through this interface as well, but we'll look at that more later. The section that we're mainly concerned with today is the appearance section, okay, and specifically the theme section here. Okay, so the themes section is, logically enough, where we install and activate and configure any themes that are available to WordPress. So you can see, as part of the default installation, it's got two themes here. There's this theme called 2013, which is the one, as we saw, that is already applied. Okay, and then there's another one down here called 2012. Which is just an older version of the default theme. Okay, and if we want to activate a new theme, then we simply click on the activate link for it. Okay, and that shows up here as the now default activated theme. And if I were to refresh the site, okay, I can see the content is all the same, but it's simply just the layout and the look and feel of the site that has changed. So this is one of the big benefits of storing our content and our theming information separately like this. Okay, is we can have the same content, and without having to create a whole new website, we can change how it looks by simply just applying a new theme rather than creating a whole new website. Okay, so just make sure we've covered everything to do with that. Yes, okay, so that covers the first part, which is installing WordPress on a remote web server. And as I said, if there's differences between the setup process for your web hosting and what I've demonstrated, then the concept should be the same. But if you are having trouble, I'm happy to kind of try and help you figure out how to do those things as well.